project has collaboratively worked together with ASEAN member states to build effective mechanisms to enhance disaster health management capacity in the region. Indonesia, as host country of ASEAN Institute for Disaster Health Management, organized academic activities to strengthen capacities of disaster health-related personnel, such as curriculum development, trainings, and simulation exercises. Conduct consultations in supporting and assisting the development and implementation of disaster health management activities. Facilitate, provide policy guidance, and support the organization of regional collaboration drills on disaster health management in AMS. Support the ASEAN Academic Network on Disaster Health Management, AANDHM, including the steering committee, in the execution of its mandate as articulated in its terms of reference. Support and facilitate the establishment of a regional network of training centers of ASEAN member states that implement general and specialized learning, education, and/or research programs on disaster health management.
To contain knowledge management basis in disaster frame, which is one of the ASEAN Academic Network on DHM activities, by establishing the ASEAN Journal Disaster Health Management or AJDHM. ASEAN Journal of Disaster Health Management is a scholarly publication that is dedicated to advancing the scientific knowledge of disaster health management from the ASEAN and non-ASEAN regions. Facilitated by the ASEAN Institute for Disaster Health Management, the journal serves as a scientific platform for researchers, medical practitioners, decision makers, as well as scientists who are interested in DHM. AJDHM was established to provide opportunities for young medical practitioners and all healthcare providers in relevant fields on DHM, and researchers who may be inexperienced in writing English papers from ASEAN and non-ASEAN regions. Platform to publicize case studies of actual DHM practices in the ASEAN region, DHM domains of regional research, capacity development and policy recommendations, and collaboration between health sectors and other sectors in disasters. Promote the WHO Health Emergency and Disaster Risk Management Framework in ASEAN. Review articles for world-class and high-quality articles on DHM should be published proactively. Submit your article and contribute to scientific ways for positive impact to the ASEAN and global beyond.
Hello everyone, good afternoon. First, I'd like to welcome to you all that attend on time today and always continues our meeting. This is a board meeting, academic writing workshop sponsored by Asian Journal of Disaster Health Management. I appreciate everyone attending this online seminar and as well the speaker and our partners. So this is academic workshop is organized by team Asian Journal of Disaster Health Management, AJDHM, under the Asian Institute for Disaster Health Management, HIDHM. The Asian Journal of Disaster Health Management is a knowledge platform to facilitate young medical practitioners or other healthcare profession, and as well the humanitarian activities related to the HM to increase their capacity to writing a research paper, so we can have some kind of bank, knowledge bank for disaster health management activities, and not only for Asian countries as well for non-Asian regions. Researcher can share the scientific, and we try to facilitate the first publication of our journal in this year. Okay, as part of the first issue publication, AJDHM continues to facilitate this academic writing workshop series we conducting every week on Friday, and today is our fourth meeting. We hope participants will have the opportunity to engage in interactive session and learn from experts in the field of research. Okay, well, without further ado, I would like to begin by introduce our delightful speaker, Dr. Martin Koch, Associate Professor from Methodology and Applied Biostatistics, Department of Health Sciences, Vrije Universiteit Amsterdam, Netherlands. The curriculum. Hi, hello, how are you, Dr. Martin Koch?
Fine, fine, thank you. Happy to be here and join all of you.
Yeah, okay, nice. What are the things that you want to share today?
I think what we discussed in preparing this meeting is to focus primarily on the limitations, conclusion, and the abstract, but I also got a request to look a bit at writing clarity and the narrative structure of a paper. So I'll start with that and then bring it all back to the overall structure of a paper with a bit more focus on the final parts, because I do think that limitation, conclusion, and abstract should be linked to the rest of
okay. Well, that's really engaging. I think that's what we are looking for to complete our previous meeting, and you can also remember us and reminding us about the previous material from introduction, whole of the research paper. That's good. I think your presentation will cover the issue. Please, the time is yours, Dr. Martin Koch.
Thank you. And will you share my slides?
Oh, yeah, sure.
Or do I it? I think it's more easy for me if I share them, but...
Oh, okay. Share by you, yeah?
Let me see if that's possible. Yeah. Yes, and I will start from the beginning.
Yeah, we see your presentation.
Is it clear?
Yeah, great.
And can you hear me well? Good.
Pardon?
And can you hear me well, my voice?
Yes, yes, we can
Good.
hear you well, and we see your presentation, the first slide.
Great. Okay, well, first of all, nice to meet all of you. I wish I could be there together with you in the room, but unfortunately that's not possible. So my name is Dr. Martin Oliver Koch. I've been, my background is in both biomedical science and in public administration, and I'm also an epidemiologist. And I've been working in about 15 countries. I'm currently affiliated to 2 universities, actually, Erasmus School for Health Policy and Management and the VU University in Amsterdam. And I've been working with Universitas Gadjah Mada since 2015, starting with a joint project. And the purpose of that joint project initially was to support scholars, young scholars from UGM towards a scientific publication. So I think that's very similar to actually what this is about. That project that I was working with was a bit more intensive. We did spend a lot of time together. We came several weeks, 1 week at a time, and then worked closely with a group of young staff from UGM and supported them in their research. And I think that led to a series of quite interesting high impact papers, including in Lancet, BMJ, Health Policy and Planning, BMJ Open. So I think in quite prestigious journals. And I think I was really impressed by the quality of the research, but also I think it did require work to get the group up to a level and also into a way of thinking that managed to link their research and their great work to a publication. So I'm going to briefly get back from some of those experiences in what I'm going to bring in today. And I was given originally a session of over 2 hours. I think that's way too much. I think we'll need about an hour, maybe an hour and a half. So you have some time for dinner in time. So one of the pictures of us working together with some of the people you actually may know from your institute on our previous work. And this request was to work with you was a bit last minute because it somehow ended up in my spam inbox. So I was asked to write about coherence, the limitations, conclusions, and abstract. But for me, all elements of a paper should form one coherent narrative. And I think it's really about getting the line of a paper correct and a very clear structure of your paper. And then the other sections like limitations, conclusion, abstract, etc., flow from the other elements. So it's difficult to talk about them without considering the rest. So that's why I will link up also to the other elements of the paper, and I think we can discuss that here as well. So I think that will be the essence. And I think one of the things that we learned in our first collaboration with the younger Indonesian scholars is that it's also really important to talk about clear writing and clear academic writing. And I've asked the people organizing this session, okay, what are the papers about? Could you share some of it? And there were 5 papers or 5 themes, it seemed, and I haven't seen any of the work yet. So I'm very curious to learn more about what you're working on, because it seems highly relevant and an important issue. So one topic was disasters and public health, human development and education for disaster health management, but also regional collaboration mechanisms, for instance, case study reports. So I think those are really nice topics to write about and highly relevant. And also I think it's great that you're sharing some of the knowledge that you have in your countries with others. So please make sure you do all the work to get up to a great publication. Some general writing tips. First of all, for scientific publications, because I do think these are important in your work. Now, first of all, what's in a paper, right? And I think you've prepared for this already, and you've already done some work and already had a workshop. So you do know the core components of a paper, which is essentially an introduction, a method section, a result section, and a discussion. And it's good to think about what it actually is that you do in each of these components. In the introduction, you try to make the audience understand what question am I asking and why am I asking this question. And in more biomedical papers, we tend to be clear and have a sort of a joint understanding of the issues that we discuss, that we raise in the introduction. But when people or when scholars do work on things that tend to be a bit more vague or less clear, we often also need a conceptual or theoretical framework that is a bit more explicit, in which you make sure what concepts are you use and what theories guide your inquiry. And I do think that for disaster health management, this is often important, because different people have different ideas about when do you consider something a disaster, for instance. I know somebody who looked at definitions, especially in disaster management, and I think they found like 80 different definitions. And so then you need to be clear about, okay, what are the concepts that I use? Of course, in the method section, you explain how you ask that question, and especially what you do to answer that question. In the results you present, what the answer was, and then in the discussion interpretation, you flow into, okay, what does it actually mean? And I think it's useful to think about these components, especially also when you write an abstract, right? You can basically, you want to give an answer to these components. Okay, what in the results, what was the answer? People should, if they read an abstract, understand that. If you read the discussion, it should give an answer to what do these findings mean? But that's not all. And I think you're at the beginning of scientific publication, and I think you tend to focus on the paper itself right now. But as you see here, the paper itself is only a small part of a publication, right? There's a lot of other components of a publication that you need to think of and that you need to write up. And a lot of those things come later, but of course you need a very clear and strong title. You need the list of authors with institutions. You need keywords. You need often a lay summary with key points. The abstract and then the paper, but also tables, figures, illustrations with proper captions, references, author contributions, you may need to make them clear, the acknowledgements, data sharing statement, funding source statement, conflict of interest statement. So there's a whole bunch of other things that you also need to consider in the publication process. Now, when you write, your job is to build up a story, right? You as an author, and this is true in papers, even more in presentations. But basically, you begin with the mystery that you want to solve. You lay out that mystery, and then you tell about your skills as a detective, as a scientist, and then you tell what your detectives found, and then you explain what it all means, and you bring it all together. And never ever leave readers thinking, so what, right? I think this is, in Indonesian, it's terus kenapa. Am I correct?
Yes.
Yeah, terus kenapa, right? So what? What does this mean? And I think that's really important to, and also in an abstract, there needs to be a very clear so what. That really helps people in understanding your work. Now, overall, clear language is clear thinking. And so you want to be precise in your language. Don't use general terms when you can be specific. So you want to say, you don't want to write, we provided incentives, but you want to say, okay, we paid mothers 100,000 rupiah each. That's precise. You also want to be concise. You never use a lengthy or pompous words when you can use a short and simple word. If you can use the word bad or harmful, that's better than the word deleterious. Strengthens is clearer than the word enhanced. Risk is clearer than the word vulnerability, etc. Some people believe, and also I have that in my institutions, that the more difficult words you use, the more scientific you are. No, you want to be as clear and basic as possible. It's better if your 11-year-old nephew understands it because you use clear language that is precise and concise. And I think this was in our previous work with the Indonesian team. Precise writing was also something that we really had to work on. Sometimes they wrote about, okay, in the articles they were writing about certain groups, but which groups exactly do you mean? And it was also a way not to maybe offend people or to be strategic, but you want to be specific in your writing. So that really is an issue. In English, the clearest, most simple structure for a sentence is subject, verb, object. Who did something, what they did, and who or what they did it to. And when I work with my Indonesian PhD students, I often make a joke. I ask them, okay, what do you like to eat or what do you like to drink? And then one of them is called Embus, and Embus says, oh, I like to eat mango. So if you want to say subject, verb, object, then you say Embus eats mango. And if you use that very simple structure, every time you write a sentence, it really helps you with writing. So you can make your own Embus eats mango. If Andrea likes to eat papaya or likes to drink whatever, you can use that as a to help yourself, especially when you're stuck in writing. You go back to, okay, subject, verb, object. Who did something? What did they do? Who or what did they do it to? And that gives you a very basic way of writing that really helps you to communicate your messages to your audience. In general, one sentence should express one idea. So try to also be clear in that. And what really helps people when writing, and I also always try to force myself when I do this. I think I published about 50 papers in peer-reviewed journals now, but it's always also for me, I really need to structure my thinking. And what really helps to start each paragraph with a sentence in which you say what you're going to say. And that really forces you to think about, okay, what do I want to discuss in this sentence? And if you take an article that's well written, you can basically take a yellow marker, you can strike out all the first sentences of the paragraphs, and that should give you the flow of the paper. If it doesn't, then they need to do their homework better. And so it really helps you to structure. And also when you look at each other's work, take a marker, go one after the other through the topic sentences of the first sentence of each paragraph, and that should give you the flow of the argument, the narrative of the paper. If it doesn't, go back, try to write it better. I think that really helps you in your thinking. And it's also when I work with my students in the Netherlands, but also my PhD students in Indonesia, and they write a paper, I tell them, okay, let's first write all your topic sentences. So you don't have to fully write every sentence of every paragraph, but just the first topic sentence. And if you do that, you get the flow of your argument. You can easily convey your message. So I think it's really a simple, basic trick that really helps you in building up and structuring your paper. I just gave an example, right? So we want to write, ideally, we want to say who did something, what they did, and who or what they did it to. Could you rewrite, as a very quick assignment, could you try to rewrite this sentence more clearly? So I give you half a minute, read the sentence carefully, try to rewrite it, and then I hope that one of you is willing to put it in the chat or read it out loud, and then we'll talk about it. So I'm going to
Okay,
give you
for participant,
a few
please
seconds. Yes.
give a expression, raise hand before you turn on your microphone, or texting on chat box. Maybe for the first, Dr. Martin, you can give us an example to answer this.
Versus. Okay, so the current sentence is having been inspected for culture growth by the lab staff. The Petri dishes were incubated at 38 degrees. Right now, if you want to write this in a more simple way, let me see. You want to start with subject, who did something, verb, what they did, and the object, who they did it to, right? So if you rewrite this in a more clear way, you say the lab staff inspected the Petri dishes for culture growth and then incubated them at 38 degrees. So you start with the lab staff, embus, what they did, inspected or embus eats, and then the Petri dishes for culture growth, mango, right? So always this structure, always subject, verb, object. Right? So having been inspected for culture growth by the lab staff, the Petri dishes were incubated at 38 degrees. It's difficult to understand. And it's more simple if you say, the lab staff inspected the Petri dishes for culture growth and then incubated them at 38 degrees. That's a lot clearer. And the same, another example, the model, which was approved after consideration and discussion by country experts as well as by the WHO team, predicted an increase in polio in Pakistan. Try to rewrite that more clearly. And it would be great if there's a brave soul willing to share his or her attempt.
WHO team as a subject. There are
It's both, right?
consideration and discussion about the model. Yeah, come on, participant.
So subject, verb.
But the country
yeah.
experts and the country
Sani
experts
Fadila.
and the country experts and the WHO team approved the model after consideration in discussion, predicted an increase in polio in Pakistan, which predicted an increase in polio in Pakistan.
Great. Great. These are, first of all, I really always admire the people who are willing to step up and speak. So, let me see what. Sorry.
Sani Fadila and Hana Desriana.
Great. So country experts in the WHO team discussed and approved the model, which predicted that polio would rise in Pakistan. That's the way I did it. But you can of course make slight variations. But it does really work, right? If you start with, okay, who's doing that? And in this case, it's country expert and the WHO team. What are they doing? Or what did they do? Well, they discussed and approved the model. And who did they do it to? The model, which then predicted that polio would rise in Pakistan. And so great job. And what I also said is, okay, what you want ideally is that every paragraph should have one topic. And a paragraph should start with a sentence in which you say what you're going to say. And then if you have a new topic, ideally you start with a new paragraph. And this is a challenging sentence. This is from one of the papers that we were working on, which eventually has been published in a solid journal. So how many topics are there in this paragraph?
Come on, guys.
4.
3. Yeah, some people say 3 or 4. Right, so this has a lot of different topics, right? According to one paper, there are several issues in expanding insurance to more informal workers. This was in expanding the JKN in Indonesia. First, the first selection threatens the sustainability of JKN. Second, many Indonesians have a low risk perception, so health insurance is not considered critical. Third, many registered participants are in arrears with their monthly payments, right? This is about people paying for their JKN or not, but it's several different topics. So you want to split this up into multiple paragraphs so you can make this more useful for and more clear for people to understand. Yeah, and it's 3 or 4 topics, absolutely. Let me go back to my oh. Wait. I want to go to my next slide. Sorry. I do have an issue with going to my next slide. Now it works. Yes. Can you see my next slide?
Yes, we see your slide.
Yes, good. Yeah, good. Another question is, do I need that word? Ideally, fewer words are usually better. So kindly try to rewrite this without changing the meaning. So at this time, our laboratory is announcing a new invention which will serve to simplify writing so that useless or unnecessary words and language are not permitted to obscure the true facts. And it's a very long and lengthy, complicated sentence. I think you can simplify it very much. By basically saying, okay, we announced an invention which simplifies writing, eliminating words that obscures the facts. Right? And that's a much shorter, simpler way to exactly say the same. I think this is the way you want to write in a scientific article. Another issue is try to be active. Some people, more especially traditionally, and also more in American journals, tend to use passive tense. So research was conducted to compare the use of the active and passive voices in sentences of different lengths in scientific writing. It was concluded that the passive voice performed less well in communicating results, while lengthy sentences are also more likely to have a negative outcome on comprehension measures in readers. This is passive. And it's much easier to understand if you say, we compared different scientific writing styles. Short sentences were easier to understand, so were sentences with active verbs. It's the same message, but written up in an active way, which is much easier to understand. So I think you can be there, you can be present as an author and use we instead of be very passive in the writing. And of course, correct punctuation is essential. 2 lines, eats, shoots, and leaves. Eats, shoots, and leaves. And if you add a comma at the right spot, you get something very different. The panda on the upper panda, he eats, shoots, and he eats leaves. So eats, shoots, and leaves. And the other panda, he eats, in a restaurant, then he shoots and then he leaves. It's more like a cowboy. So it's the same sentence, but a comma completely changes the meaning. And avoid acronyms. And in Indonesia, it's amazing the number of acronyms. If you write for an international audience, you really need to accept that they don't know a lot about your country, and also they don't know the acronyms you're using. And if possible, it's better to try to not use acronyms. So especially if they're likely to be unfamiliar to the majority of your readers, then consider using an understandable English language proxy throughout the text and in tables. So PBU is the same as informal sector workers, but people will understand informal sector workers. I think something like WHO, people will know, but the very long list of acronyms that you run into in Indonesia is unlikely to be understood by a large part of your audience. So be careful with that. And if English is not your mother tongue, which is the case for most of you, and even if it is your mother tongue, it's important to read. Normally, I say read the journal you're submitting to. You're working on a new journal, but there's well-known journals like Lancet, BMJ. I think it's really useful to read and try to read quite often. Check if the journal has a style guide. If it has, use it. It really helps you in improving your writing. When you write, try to read your sentences out loud. If it sounds clumsy, it will be clumsy in the writing. And use a spell and grammar check. There's always software available for that. I think ChatGPT, you need to be careful with it. But for helping your grammar, I always suggest don't let ChatGPT write your text. You write your text, but you can add a paragraph in it. Explain to ChatGPT very clearly that you're writing a scientific article and that you want advice on improving the precision, the grammar, and ask for suggestions in improving the text. And then don't let it rewrite your text, but carefully look at the suggestions it provides and use that to improve your text. But you need to be careful with it. You need to write your own text. I think that's really important for precision and to be precise and concise. And don't worry too much. It's all about having good science. Bad language is easy to fix. Bad science is not. And a good editor knows the difference. So if it's, if there's some issues in your language, then it can be improved and you can still pass peer review. So this was my the first element I wanted to discuss with you. Are there any questions before I continue with the next element?
Yeah. That's a detailed explanation how to write a clear sentences, topic idea, avoid some acronyms, or an important thing, it's about mother tongue habit. Sometimes we make a sentence, make a paragraph, but in mother tongue perception. So it's important to read it loud. Yeah, that's good. Okay, everyone can turn on the microphone or ask in the chat box. Before we continue.
If there are no questions,
okay,
then I will continue.
This one from Miranda. Let me, yeah. Every good point, especially in keeping sentences simple and short. Also, the use of punctuation are very true. Thank you. That's a comment. Yeah, and I will remember, Dr. Martin, with your picture of Kung Fu Panda. So that's important to use a punctuation sign for our sentence.
That's also an important issue, right?
Yeah.
Because it can lead to very big mistakes in writing. Okay, let me continue for the sake of time. And I'm going to talk you briefly through introduction, and because you already worked on this, I think. But I think to get the good flow in the paper and to see the how introduction, discussion, abstract, and all of it links together, I think it's useful to briefly go through again. So what do you do in the introduction, actually? Basically, you explain to the audience why they should be reading that paper, right? So you did a great study and you want them to understand. And the introduction basically has 4 components. You briefly lay out the problem. You explain what we already know about the problem, what we don't know about the problem, and why we need to know that. And then how you're going to find out. And nothing else. And that last part is, I often notice, very, very difficult for people. They want to put all kinds of things in the introduction that do not need to be in there and that distract people from writing a good introduction. And it's essentially a funnel. And I think in Indonesian word is korong, right? That's the shape of the introduction. So very briefly, what's the problem that you're working on? And what I often notice is that people tend to write that too lengthy. So they give a very detailed explanation of the problem with a lot of background information that actually is not that interesting for the paper. I can look that up myself. So that can be quite short. But what is much more important is that second part is, what do we know about it? And that often starts with previous studies assessing how earthquakes impact healthcare utilization in the region, blah, 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 blah. And then so that part is much more interesting than the first part, like what is an earthquake and how often do they occur and where do they occur the most and blah, 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 blah. All that sort of more generic statements are usually not very interesting. So you want to be brief about that. And you want to be much more specific and lengthy about, okay, what do we know from previous studies? And that's also more difficult to write. But it's an important piece because that sets you up for the other elements of your study, including your methods, your discussion, and your conclusion. So you want to really work on that. Then the third part, you basically articulate what we don't know, your research gap. And after that, it's useful to come up with a sentence of why we need to know that. And that's not because it's a big problem, but why is addressing that specific gap important? So if your study is about how earthquakes impact healthcare utilization, then why do we need to know? Not because earthquakes are horrible. No, because if we want to ensure and make better policies or design better mitigation measures to ensure access to healthcare, we need to better understand how earthquakes influence access to healthcare. So it's the gap. And it often starts with little is known about, or while several studies have looked at blah, 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 little is known about, or there have been no studies yet about. And then you can say something, well, having a better understanding of how A leads to B is essential to make better policies or to design interventions or blah, blah, blah. So that's that second part of that, that paragraph. And after that, you come up with your aim. And so briefly, what's the problem? And then specifically and precisely, what do we know about that? And then briefly, what's that gap? Why we need to address that gap? And then your aim, the aim of the study is therefore flows very nicely from that funnel, from that structure. So I think this really helps. And when I teach this, I do an exercise with my students and they write papers in groups of 4. And I make each of them write one of the elements without talking to each other. And then I ask them to read out loud each of these 4 components. And if they've all done their job well, you get a nice flowing introduction. If they haven't, they need to work on it again to get it better. So this structure really helps you. And it also forms the basis of the first part of your abstract. Some do's and don'ts. So do summarize the important facts already known, referencing to important papers. Do refer to unknowns and controversies, but don't discuss in detail or criticize them. Do give brief context to establish the importance of the issue, prevalence, costs, blah, 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 but only if it's relevant to your study, and keep that brief, a brief first part. Keep it short, keep it relevant to the study that you're planning, focused on how your study might add to the sum of scientific knowledge or better health policy or practice. And don't give away the mystery, right? You want people to read your paper and read your results and discussion as well. And it's good to think, because there's often a hypothesis or a research question, and it's useful to think a little bit about the difference between those two. A research question poses the question that you would like to answer by doing your study. For instance, we investigated the uptake in healthcare in rich and poor subpopulations after the introduction of BPJS. And a hypothesis gives the expected answer to the question. So it's something different. We expected to find that poorer patients increased their use of healthcare more after the introduction of BPJS than richer patients. So it's what you expect. It's what you're going to test. So be clear for yourself about what you're writing. I'm going to skip this one for the sake of time. Be clear also for yourself what are facts, what are opinions, and what are expectations. A hypothesis should be clearly distinguished from a statement of fact. If it's a fact, it needs a reference. If it's an opinion, it belongs at the warung or at the kaki lima or wherever you're eating, or maybe a little bit in a discussion. But make sure that you are careful with where you put opinions and where you put facts. And if it's a fact, I want to see a reference. Right, so that was my brief piece on the introduction. And I think that's useful to set up the second part. Any questions about this?
Seems none, Dr. Martin. We can continue.
Question, Dr. Martin?
Okay.
Sure, yes.
So you say previously that do not state the opinion, but how about if we want to include the is a common opinion?
So if you want to right, so let me give you an example, because we have that as well. Okay. We do some research on the relation in Indonesia, on the relation between price and quality of medicine. And a lot of people believe that more expensive medicine are of better quality, right?
Yes.
It's a common opinion.
Yes, for the common opinion.
Now, yeah, ideally, you want to have a reference for that. Okay. So if there's been a study or a newspaper articles or that explain that, then you can refer to that.
So we still need a reference for stating that common opinion as well, right?
Ideally.
Okay.
Right? Or you should say, but because often if it's a common opinion, there is some reference available. Or it can also be, a common opinion or in several newspapers or, suggest that. Or you should, you could say, well, opinion leaders on Sinetron often explain that, blah, blah, blah. So there's ways to say it, but at least you want to be clear that you refer to a common opinion.
Okay,
you don't want to state it as a fact.
Oh yeah. So Dr. Martin, my question is just like when I want to state something that quite common opinion, just like for example, Indonesia is uh have Indonesia have a lot of disasters, something like that, and so I did not need to cite for that for the reference for that, right? I just can continue my sentence for the next sentence why I state that, or should I also give some of the reference for the statement?
Yeah.
It's very
So
interesting.
I think that Indonesia has a lot of good question, and thanks for asking. I think this is this an opinion or a fact that Indonesia has a lot of natural
That's
disasters?
fact. Yes. I mean that one.
Right, that's a fact. It's
Yes,
not an opinion, I think. And I think if you spend 1 minute on Google Scholar, you can find a reference for that.
yes. Sure.
Right.
So I still need to put reference for that sentence.
Well, it's I think it makes sense, right, to add a reference, and I think also you want to be precise and concise. So ideally you also make specific which natural disasters you refer to. All right.
Okay.
So
Yes.
and Indonesia is one of the countries in the world which is most prone to natural disasters such as volcano disruptions, earthquakes, tsunamis, and blah blah blah.
Oh, oh.
Yeah.
So I probably need to restate my question, Dr. Martin. So my question then is when we write one sentence, especially in one paragraph, especially in the introduction. So uh, how should how could we distinguish which sentence that need to put a reference on that, or should we better to put all of the sentence for the reference if I
Yeah.
stating some fact? Yes.
Yeah, I get your point. If it's something uh, that is really common sense,
Yes.
uh, then you can leave it without a reference.
Okay.
And that is completely widely known and is not, uh, like what causes HIV. You don't need to, or the fact that, so these very basic things that are commonly
Yes.
known, and also that is not a discussion anymore.
Okay.
Um, but then if you want to state, well, uh, earthquakes tend to cause problems with access to healthcare utilization, especially for vulnerable groups. I think that would need a reference,
Okay.
Okay.
Yes. I
right?
think.
So
Yes.
it's not 100% clear,
Yes.
but you want to think, okay, is this a statement of fact? And is this something that is a bit specific? And then it's nice to add a reference. Yeah,
Yeah. Okay. Thank you very much for your explanation, Dr. Martin.
yeah. So I also see
Thank
some
you,
nice answers
Ami.
in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Yeah, related to Miss Ami question, I I also observe my master student or undergraduate student to research about disaster. They always put Indonesia is a front country for disaster in the world. I think this is fake, but we have to put an update reference, because when we refer to the global data, Indonesia is not the most prone country. This is the third after China and the Philippines, based on the indicators. So it's tricky, Dr. Martin, to put some general fact, or that normalize the fact to input to our research.
Yep. Yes, and absolutely right. And I think no, this is a good point. And there's also like this point of often when you write about Indonesia, Indonesians forget often. It's like when you're a fish, you're not aware that you're swimming in the water, right? You're not aware of what is so common for you, but for somebody else who looks at your country, that you have such a huge country, which is so diverse, with so many inhabited islands, which with so many different languages, with so many different cultures. This is completely needs a little bit of explanation often for people from other countries. So if you're writing for fellow Indonesians, you don't need to explain that. But if you write for an international audience and you expect somebody from Zimbabwe or Iceland or the USA or Argentina to understand about Indonesia, then you need to do a little bit of explanation. So you need to think carefully, okay, who's my audience? What do I need to explain to them? And like they won't know what BPJS is. And they won't know what JKN is, and they don't know what a Puskesmas is. So what do I need to explain to them to help them understand my paper? And that's always difficult because it's so common for yourself, that you sometimes forget. So it's very useful to have people from abroad. You can send a paper to say, hey, could you have a look? Where do I need to add more information, or where is it too much? Or so it's good to have that way of collaborating.
Yeah. Okay, interesting. So related to the introduction topic, I found that two questions. First of one from Irvin Miranda. Agree on keeping the mystery of the paper. The introduction should capture the attention of the audience to read the paper until the last chapter. It introduces them to the essence of the study and not bore them with too much information. This is a comment, I think, yeah. And also from Sultan. It is very impressive and insightful lecture, Dr. Koch. I would like to thank for your presence to give me the best lecture. Actually, what do you think are the most important elements to review when revising the introduction? Because of my experiences as a student, starting to write an introduction is confusing to write the beginning, and when consulting with a supervisor, a lot of writing is not approved. Thank you so much, Dr. Koch.
Yeah. So it's a bit difficult because my experience is that you first write an introduction and your main question, and I think if you use this structure that I laid out, I think it really helps you to write those components and make sure there's a good flow in between them. Because it is confusing, and part of the confusion also is that you may not exactly know yourself where you want to go. And clarifying that for yourself very clearly, and especially also then writing those topic sentences. So what is the problem? Previous studies have shown. So what do you know about it? What we don't know, that gap, little is known about. It's relevant to understand that because the aim of this study is therefore, if you use that structure, that really can help you in organizing your own thinking. And my experience is that once you've written an entire paper, you often need to go back to the introduction and rewrite it at the end. Because only at the end of your paper, you know exactly what you need to introduce. So even though you do a first version when you start, often I think the order of writing is actually results, methods, discussion, and then introduction. Because in the end, you know exactly what you need to introduce. Because it may be that something comes up in your that you start noticing something in your when you do your analysis that you put in your result section, but that you also then need to explain a little bit about that in your introduction. So I think so that structure. But if you stick to this structure, I think it can really help you in how you organize your introduction. I also see a question about keywords.
Yeah, you answer now or after?
Yeah, maybe let's
Material?
first do this piece on
Oh,
discussion and then go through them. Yeah.
Okay, okay. And we
Maybe
next,
shall
yeah,
we do a 5-minute break for people who
yeah.
want to go to Kamar Kachil or
Okay,
yeah,
we stop for 3 minutes to
yeah,
take a drink or go
take
to
a
the
drink, a
toilet.
coffee,
Yeah.
kopi susu, toilet,
Okay,
yeah, and then
sure.
okay, good.
Ya udah 1 menit lagi. No. Yeah. Okay. Welcome again, Dr. Martin Koch. Okay, we start to answer the question from the chat from Sani Fadila. Thank you for the interesting explanation. Are there parts of the study that you found difficult to summarize in the abstract? How did you overcome this?
Yes, absolutely, and especially in when writing qualitative work, I think you often have the challenge that it seems very superficial if you need to summarize it in the abstract. So what you want to do is especially, but I think I'll come back to this also in the end a little bit more. When writing an abstract for a qualitative piece, you really want to be short on your initial part, so you have a bit more space for your result section and implication section. in your abstract. Because I think writing an abstract is really a big challenge for many people, and it takes quite a bit of time to do it. So, but I will come back to that, I think, at the end, because I have a bit more like a final piece on discussion. And I think after that, I think we should go to talk about abstract, if that's okay. Yeah.
Your PPT slide?
Yeah. Shall I?
Yeah, okay.
Yeah. Okay, good. So I think then the final piece, and I think you spoke about these pieces last time, but I do think it's good to get the flow of them, how they all fit together, right? So we said the introduction is a funnel. The discussion is also a funnel, but the other way around. Well, now, what's the aim of the discussion, right? You have multiple aims in your discussion, and maybe if you want, you can put some of them in the chat. So, what do you do in your discussion?
Bringing the recommendation.
That's one. Please put some things in the chat if you want. What do you do in your discussion?
You discuss about your result.
Yes, and in what way?
You might compare with other studies or other research.
Yeah.
Is that support your result or is that against your result? So maybe that could be one.
Yeah. I think there are 5. Relate them to existing studies, compare them to other work. Essentially, what you first do is you summarize your principal findings, right? Because you've had people who have been going through this lengthy piece, and it's very useful for them to summarize this briefly, the essence. Then you interpret your results, you compare them with previous work, you go into the specific strengths and limitations of the study. And often, if possible, you derive implications for policy and practice and try to come up with specific recommendations for further research and then give a conclusion. So you have to do quite a few different things in your discussion. And this first aim is often it makes sense to repeat your aim. So the aim of this study was, and then we found that, blah, blah, blah. So that's your summary of your principal findings in that first paragraph. Then you often have paragraph 3, 4, 5, or 2, 3, 4, 5, where you interpret your results and you contextualize them. And often you start with the most interesting findings. You compare them with previous studies, work of others, and it's good to be critical, but you want to also be polite. And sometimes it helps to start off with a more generic session. Say, several studies show that earthquakes especially impact the most vulnerable groups, right? We found that blah, blah, blah. And then, well, one of the reasons that we found something else, maybe that we used a different method, blah, 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 blah. So it can help to come up with sort of generic statements summarizing a key issue, and then link that to your findings, and then go into what that means. And then you want to go write your strengths and limitations. Some people only write the limitations, and they completely destroy their own paper. I think it makes sense to also write something about your strengths. of a study. So maybe that was just the first study in the Philippines on this topic, or no one in Thailand has used this new method before, or, you know, you want to be specific. Like these generic statements like our results may not be generalizable, blah, blah, blah. Yeah, that's not interesting. We can all think of that. But so you want to be, okay, what are the specific strengths and the specific limitations of your study? And you don't want to just shoot your study. It's often that you've thought about the limitations. So you can say, well, a potential limitation of our findings is that we were not able to validate our method with our own with the Indonesian populations. However, we did look at the way it was validated in the Philippines and in Japan, and we believe this provides confidence. So you show the limitation, but you also show that you thought about the limitation and how you try to deal with that. And so I think that helps make your strength and limitations section a bit stronger. So I think I was asked to speak about that. I think those are my core recommendations for this specific section. And ideally, you come up with some implications. Don't be shy. If you believe that your study implies changes in policy or clinical practice, or you can write something about that. And you can write it in a way that is polite. And you try to want to be practical. So also mention that there will be difficulties, or, you know, if you believe, well, sometimes people come up with recommendations and you think, well, there's also other priorities in our country and there's not unlimited money. So you need to be practical in the way you formulate your implications. I'm going to skip some of these. Yeah, if you have an unexpected result, you must discuss possible reasons for your unexpected result in your discussion. Try to be specific about the implications. Consider alternative explanations for what you found. Try to not to make generic recommendations that do not refer to the study results. So you want to really link up to what you actually found, and not sort of how you believe the world should change. So those are the key issues for the discussions, I think. And then depending on the format of the journal, you can have a conclusion. And I think it often makes sense. I try to write a conclusion to bring it all together, but you don't want to be repetitive too much, because in the beginning of your discussion, you already summarize your main findings. So in your conclusion, you want to talk a bit more about what those main findings mean. And I think that makes it a bit more interesting to read that conclusion, and also makes it a bit less repetitive. The abstract of your piece, you should be able to read an abstract. It should be a standalone abstract, right? You should be able to understand it carefully. It's important to carefully read the journal instructions, because some have a structured abstract with 4 or 5 components, some do not. Sometimes it's 250 words, sometimes it's 300, 350, 400. So that's also difficult. So you need to be very clear. But you can use the same overall structure as I used in the beginning. So of course, often it's introduction, methods, result, discussion, but try to think of the questions that underpin those sections. So why did we ask this question, and what question did we ask? How did we try to answer it? What did we find? And what does it mean? I think if you write your abstract up like that, then it's really helpful for formulating it well. I think that for me was the essence of what I wanted to explain. And I did think of an exercise a bit, but I do think first there's quite a few questions that we maybe want to discuss. So let's first do that.
10 minutes left. 10 minutes left before we closing this session. Okay, we continue from Miranda. It's about summarize in abstract as well, and related to the reference as well. Can we quote published interview. As we know, nowadays we can find a scientific podcast. I don't know how to call it, but it's very beefy. And some professor talk about in the podcast. So can, as a researcher, we quote or reverse from the video online reference and publish interview?
Yeah, I think you can quote pretty much anything as long as you're transparent about it. So as long as you're transparent about, and also that if you know if it's somebody saying something in an interview, it's not necessarily a fact, right? So unless it's somebody who presents a study and the study has not been not been presented yet. So I think you can. I think what you want to be is clear and transparent. So if it's something that appeared in the media, then okay, well then explain that. So according to a recent article in Tempo,
Oh yeah,
blah blah blah,
the
right? But
national newspapers.
yeah, but then
Yeah.
but you what you want to be clear is to your audience what it is, all right? So then you want to be clear that okay, according to a popular magazine, so don't pretend it's a scientific journal.
Ah, yeah, okay. Okay, then we move to Mr. Tian Klayang. Sorry if I mistake to pronounce your name. Thank you for your very interesting share in how framing the introduction. All points are valuable. Two things I want to know. First, should the explanation of key concept and keywords be included in the introduction?
Yes,
And
so
yeah.
let's do that first one. Um, it depends. And I think if there's consensus in the literature and everybody agrees, let's say you talk about HIV, the disease. I think there's consensus about what it is. So you don't need to give a definition. Or let's say you talk about blood. We don't have. I think there's consensus about what that is and what we mean by it, right? But if you talk about something that there may not be consensus about, or let's say resilience, that's a bit more difficult, right? As a concept, or personality, or um, so then I think it's useful to make explicit what your definition is and what you refer to. Some people I think are writing about some form of collaboration. For instance, there's collaborative governance is an approach. Well, then you want to make sure that people understand what you're writing about. So you need to think about, okay, do I need to explain these concepts? Yes or no? Are they common sense? Yes or no? Is there a lot of discussion about it? Yes or no? And I think that to me determines whether or not you want to do that. And I think if there's a lot of discussion about it and you need to do a lot of work to clarify it, it may make sense to have a theoretical or a conceptual framework or a theoretical framework or analytical framework after your introduction, in which you say, okay, to guide our study on the relation between earthquakes and healthcare utilization, we draw upon recent theory about blah, blah, blah. And then you can, so I have some papers where we've done that and where you add a theoretical or analytical framework after your introduction. And I've also have papers whereby it's enough to add 1 or 2 lines in the introduction itself, just clarifying the concept. And we also have papers whereby we don't do either because the things that we write about are clear enough for everybody. So you want to think about that.
Okay. And I think from Mr. Tien, the second question is answered previously. And the answer is depends on our consideration, and we have to transparent to our reader when we put some reference. Okay, and we move to Sultan. I mean before Sultan we move to Question from Ricky. Yeah, it's about keywords. How to choose keywords. In example, our variable research is budgeting for disaster. The challenges planning disaster budgeting and as well SWOT analysis for disaster financing. That's Ricky variables. What do you think if our keywords are disaster health management, disaster budgeting, and disaster planning, and as well SWOT analysis? Yeah, I think it's very real common that we have to put one word for keywords, or in example for disaster health management consists of 3 words. What do you think?
Yeah,
To
it's a
help
challenge,
Ricky
right?
Priyanggara.
Yeah. It seems to make sense what you're doing. The question is always, for what purpose do you use the keywords?
Yeah.
Right? And there's mesh terms which are used in, and I put it in the chat, which are also used in PubMed, that are commonly used to identify papers. So it may be useful to look at them and say, hey, is there a mesh term that you can link up to? But it's not always the case. So that's one. And yeah, I depends. I think you may want to add the country name as well. So I don't know which country most of you are, I think is Indonesia, but there's also other countries maybe joining. So if it's a study in Japan, or if it's a study in the Philippines or in Thailand or in, you want to also maybe add an element of context in that. I think it's what you can also play around with is just Google them and see how many hits you get on a word.
Okay. I think we have to consider to discuss about mesh in PubMed and how to determine the topic or the keywords. It's very important, related also for reference. Okay, for another's. Okay,
Yeah.
another session. The last question from Sultan. Again, what strategies can we use to link your discussion back to the introduction and literature review? Again, from my experience, when writing a master thesis research, this is especially difficult if our research is very rarely when compared to previous research. But the point I took earlier is that the strength of our research can be discussed. And the discussion section, Dr. Kok, thank you so much.
Yeah, I get your point, right? If you do a unique study, those are usually the most interesting ones, but also difficult because to what literature can you then link back in your discussion? And but I think you need to sometimes think a bit broader, and that there's often quite a bit of literature that you can link up to. But you can also say, well, there's very few studies looking at this, and therefore, which makes it difficult to contextualize the findings. So if there are very few studies by others looking at something similar, it's useful to make that explicit and state that. I think that's really helpful. But yeah, it's more difficult. I now have a student working on something in Indonesia actually who has the same challenge, and he's doing something quite unique that nobody else did before. But at the same time, there are ways to link up to work by others. So to be a bit creative about that and think a bit broader. Sometimes, for instance, if you look at stigma on a specific group, and there's no studies in that specific group yet, but there's a lot of research on stigma in other groups. That may have, and the same with a lot of topics. If you look at a specific kind of disaster and how that impacts health, and there may have been very few studies about that. There may be other studies that look at other kinds of disasters that also cause similar problems, and then you can refer to that. So there's often creative ways to find a solution.
Yeah, okay. Well, thank you for delightful speakers and participants as well. We have to finish here. But our next meeting will be scheduled for a deeply discuss about how to submit the articles to the Asian Journal of Disaster Health Management, and as well the committee has considering to give a more discussion about the qualitative research, and as well how to practice find the reference from PubMed or another application. So we will meet again at 21st of June 2024 in the afternoon, Friday afternoon. Again, I really thank you for Dr. Martin Cook, and as well I'd like for participants. It is a very productive discussion. Have a nice day. Happy weekend.
Thank you, everybody, and have a nice weekend. Selamat makan, I should say, for your evening. Have a good
Selamat
weekend.
malam.
Thank you.
Selamat
Selamat
makan
malam
malam.
already. Yes, malam.
Yes. Dinner time in Asian.
Yes, yes.